Hey guys, welcome to the video, welcome to the garage, welcome to my channel. So in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through and answer. I've got a list of some questions that have accumulated over the last probably year. So I'm going to answer some of those by taking pictures and explaining it a little bit on the Baja. So the first question is, if you've watched my other videos, you know that this Baja right now has combo spindles on it, and the new spindle that I'm designing uses Toyota 4Runner hub assemblies, and it's a lot larger. And some people have asked me, what is the size difference between those two? And that's a really good question, because as I'm building the new suspension for this, the suspension is supposed to be a lot stronger, but it is also going to be heavier, and there's just going to be more mass there. So I'm ready to put that combo spindle back onto the Bug here, but before I do that, I wanted to do a comparison of the two. So let's go down into the basement where I'm going to take both of the spindles side by side and we'll weigh them and look at a couple of differences between them. So this is the size difference between the two. These are stronger. There's a lot more steel on this one. These are good for 31-inch tires. These I'm considering good for 33 to 35, although I haven't tested these yet. There is a significant weight difference, so let's get a scale out and see the difference. Alright, so I got my digital scale here. It's zeroed out, ready to go. Let's put the combo spindle on here first. The combo spindle is 20.3 pounds. Is 30.5, so it's about 10 pounds heavier. I'll be honest with you, I actually thought it would be almost double the weight, because when you're just picking it up and carrying it around, it feels like it's twice the weight. But let's move on to the next question. Next question is, on my current Baja right now, am I running limiting straps in the front? Let's go take a look. The answer is no. When I built this, I kind of made everything, put on my bump stop. I never did a limiting strap. I should. What I did because of that is I left the rebound valved pretty tight on the springs, so when the front end does come up, it can't like violently jerk itself, because the shock absorbers right now are the limiting factor. But it should have limiting straps, but it doesn't. You'll probably see in the future me adding limiting straps on here. Next question is, do I have limiting straps in the rear? It does have limiting straps in the back. They're right here. They come down, connect to the arm here. They connect to the chassis up here. The way I do this up here is I've got this is like a 3-inch piece, and if I need to make some minor changes to the length of the limiting strap, I just cut a new piece and make some changes to how long it is. The limiting straps in the rear are crucial, because the shock absorbers will allow this suspension to drop farther than the U-joints will handle. So if this limiting strap isn't here, if I was going over a bump and this rear suspension overextended, it would break these drive shafts. The next question is, are my rear spindles strong enough? The answer is no, it's not. Well, what that means is, instead of making it out of 1/8 inch, I probably should have made it out of 3/16, because it's almost strong enough. It hasn't bent, but it does flex. And what I mean by that, when I say it hasn't bent, I mean it's straight. I've taken this apart twice, and I've checked the surface here that everything mounts to, and it is still flat. However, when I'm off-roading and I'm on the trails and I'm hitting it more aggressive than normal, I can tell that this spindle is allowing this hub assembly to flex a little bit. The reason that I know that is, if I'm getting really aggressive, when I hit the brakes, the pedal goes down farther than it normally does. And what that means is, this rotor in the hub assembly is being allowed to move a little bit, and when it does that, it pushes the brake pads in my caliper farther apart. So when I step on the brakes, the first thing I have to do is kind of push on the pedal to reseat the pads, and then the brakes are back to normal. So I'm not concerned with catastrophic failure, but the next set of spindles that I make for the rear here, you will see me make them out of thicker than 1/8 inch. Next question is a really good one. It's about how my steering shaft makes it over my brake and clutch pedal assembly and through the firewall to the steering box. So the best way I can answer that is I'm just going to show you the path that it takes because it's really tight. So I got my steering shaft coming down through here. It terminates right here, and I've got a little coupler in there. This is a custom piece that I made. You can buy those shorter ones, and in hindsight, I probably should have done that because it would have given me a little bit more clearance, but for some reason I made this long one, and you can even see I really butchered it up there. But either way, this is the Wilwood reverse hanging pedal assembly. It's basically a hanging pedal assembly that puts the master cylinders on this side, which I thought would be nice because it keeps it all internal, and I do have some space here to get the plumbing kind of up and out of harm's way where the tires aren't throwing any debris at it or anything like that. But it does make clearance up here really tight. You can see that all three of these had a little snaps on them like this, and I actually had to take those off, and I just keep these covers on with pipe straps because there's not enough room for these. And then you can see right here I've got a universal joint, and it's so tight back here that I even had to take a little 1/8 inch notch out of this piece of the chassis in order for the U-joint to clear when it rotates. But that did work. Once it makes it over the master cylinders, it comes down. This is the steering shaft right here. It comes down through here, continues on an angle, is the entire reason that the connection point for the upper control arm is right here. If it wasn't for this steering shaft, this would have actually been moved farther back for more strength, but I had to push these up in order to give clearance for the steering shaft because the steering shaft just clears the upper control arm at full droop right here. And then it comes down through here and just connects to a regular U-joint where it ties in with the steering box. Another question I get asked quite a bit is, how does my transaxle mount kind of incorporate into the chassis? So let's go back and take a look at that. This bar right here, this is a 1 inch by 2 inch. Sorry about all the hanging plastic. I never peeled the plastic off of the chassis. This is a 1 inch by 2 inch piece that actually is what the main bulk of the transaxle mounts to. And what this is I built this portion of the chassis first. This is completely flat. This has the rocker panels that tie in to the main chassis. So this is the main chassis. Now when it came time to install the transaxle, I mounted this part below the chassis. I did not want to do that, and I'm going to try not to do that on the new chassis because obviously this is going to be a terrible low spot if I ever bottom out, especially right here. And my intention was to actually build a very robust skid plate that would kind of come up under here and give me a little bit more of an approach there. But since I kind of stopped working on this chassis and started going with the new chassis, I kind of stopped on that. I needed, or at least wanted, to mount this as low as possible because the lower I can get my transaxle mounted, the more droop I get. Because I don't max out on my drive shafts on my compression, but I do max out on my drive shafts on my droop. So I wanted the transaxle as low as feasibly possible. In doing that, I ended up installing this underneath the chassis, which again, hopefully I don't have to do that on the next chassis, but we'll see how it goes. And then once I had this welded in place, that was kind of my substructure for all that. I did pieces like this to tie it in more to the main chassis, and then there's pieces like this and the engine cage that actually come down and tie it in even more. So it's actually tied in quite a few places. And then this is a bus type 2. So it's got the 2 bolts up here that you can use as a forward mounting location. So I made these tubular pieces that, if you notice, this ties it in with the understructure and it ties it into the frame a little bit, and then it gives me a really strong mounting point here for the transaxle. Then back there, if you see, the Type 2 also has these 2 mounting points on top of the bell housing. I incorporated those into the chassis itself. These are not even part of the substructure, so these tie the top portion into the chassis. And then down here where the engine cage ties in, I also made a little like cross member that also grabs the lower control points here. So actually this transaxle is connected in 6 spots, 2 down here, 2 at the top of the bell housing, and 2 in the front of the transaxle. So it's actually mounted and they're quite solid. Another question I get quite a bit is, does the radiator placement work? And the answer is yes, it does. As far as cooling the engine, it does that just fine. During most of my driving, almost all of my driving, there's 2 radiator fans on here. It just runs on the one fan and that gets the job done. When I'm up in the mountains at slower speeds, at higher RPM, sometimes I'll hear the second fan kick on. But for the most part, it spends most of its time on the one fan. However, what it doesn't do well is the heat that comes off goes back here and somehow circulates back around and actually really warms the cab up a lot. So I don't have any problem cooling the motor, but with this layout, it heats the cab up real bad. Now, one thing that I did in the summer is I actually took the forward portion of my firewall, bulkhead, whatever you want to call it. I took that off so that fresh air comes right through here. And that actually works great. That completely solves the problem. And on my next build, I might put some vents in here that I can open or close, because that makes the radiator placement okay. However, it is a little bit annoying having this open because dust and debris and butterflies and crickets all come through here as well. And one project that I'm working on a little bit right now that it's so cold that I can't really drive it is I'm thinking about remounting this radiator. I haven't decided where yet. I might mount it up here. I might try and mount it right here. I'm not sure. I don't want to have to cut the body apart at all. What I'm working on right now is just disconnecting everything. I do have one cooling fan that I need to repair. Over the summer, this shroud here cracked, so I need to get this out. Another thing I noticed is with my placement right here, it's almost impossible to get the electric fans out, so that's not a good thing. So you'll see a video coming up where I probably relocate this to try and solve some of the problems that it has right here. Next question I get asked actually quite a bit is, how does the body separate from the chassis? I'm not going to go into depth on that because that could be a whole separate video. As a matter of fact, there is a video where I go over that like a year ago. But the quick answer is, essentially what I did when I made this chassis is, it was a regular Baja Bug with a rusted out pan and rusted out rocker arms. And what I did is, this is a piece of 3" by 2" rectangular steel, and I, with a Sawzall, just cut out the stock rockers. I put in this 3x2 and I had to, make some cuts in it to get it to kind of follow the body line. But I essentially tacked this in place where the rocker was. And then at that point, I just started cutting out pieces of the body and installing these 2x2 pieces of steel, connecting one side to the other. And they go right through the tunnel. The tunnel is actually pretty solid, and they're solid welded into the tunnel. And then they come back here, and this is a 1x2 that's smashed up against the 2x3. So this has bolts on this side, and this has bolts on this side where they bolt together. And that's all the way around the chassis. And there's also some bolts up by the steering column, and there's kind of bolts hidden all over the place. And it's not something that you can just do in like an hour, but if you disconnect all of the electrical and you run around and you take all these bolts out, then the body literally lifts straight up from the chassis. The next question, a big question, what am I doing with this Baja? You always hear me talking about my next chassis, the big chassis, this chassis which isn't supposed to have a Baja Bug body. What am I doing with this chassis? I think what's going to happen is, I think, and this is not definitive yet, but I think the wife and I are going to be moving into a different house in the same area, but it's going to have a larger garage. As a matter of fact, that's the entire reason that we're moving, is because I want a bigger garage. If that happens, and if it does, it'll probably happen at the end of this summer, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue building the new chassis that doesn't have a Baja Bug body, but that's going to go on the back burner. What I'm going to do is build a chassis for this Bug first, and it's going to be a chassis similar to the one I'm building now, but it's going to be meant for a Baja Buggy, which will be this body, to wrap around it. And then I'm going to build it up with essentially the same dimensions as this Baja right now, only with my new suspension. So what it'll be is, it'll be a Baja very similar to this. It'll look just like this because it's going to have this body, but it's going to have a much better chassis, and then it's going to have stronger suspension. In the meantime, because I'm hoping to be able to go that direction, what you're going to see me start doing is testing out portions of the new suspension and other things, kind of like experimenting with them on this chassis, because I can still drive this chassis and I can test out my new shock absorbers and bump stops and possibly some new suspension arms on this chassis. Thanks for watching the video. I appreciate you guys asking the questions and giving me advice. I've changed my path on my projects numerous times with comments that you guys have given me. I really appreciate that. It's helped me make a stronger Baja, and I think it's also helped you guys with your projects. So, as always, thanks for watching the video. I hope these are helping you guys with your own projects, and I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.